So moved.
All right, Your Honor, that would bring us back to needing a motion to return to study session.
So moved.
Second.
So there is a motion and a second to come back to regular study session. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes. What is the council's pleasure for item 2?
Mayor, on this item, which is with respect to the update on the opioid litigation, I would ask for a motion under which the mayor and council authorize and direct the city attorney to proceed as discussed in executive session and to execute a memorandum of understanding with other relevant Arizona jurisdictions, subject to the terms and conditions that we discussed in executive session.
May I have a motion?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes. What is the council's pleasure for item 4?
Your Honor, on this item, which was an update on our ongoing litigation of the elections issue, which is pending in the Arizona Supreme Court, it doesn't require any motion or direction from the mayor and council at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Rankin. What is the council's pleasure for item 6?
And Honorable Mayor, members of the council, on this item relating to the property at Silverbell and Goret, I'd ask for a motion authorizing and directing the city manager and staff to proceed as was discussed in executive session.
So moved. Second.
There is a motion and a second. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Item 7, time has been set aside for an update on the COVID-19 emergency. As I do usually during study sessions on this particular item, I'd like to outline what we're going to discuss. I'm just really pleased that the city of Tucson and Pima County and other jurisdictions are working hand in hand with Pima County Health Department. According to Pima County Health Department, we are testing at least 1,500 people a day, which is where we want to be according to Pima County Health Department. City locations for testing are Utah and El Pueblo Activity Center. So far at Utah, we have tested 9,300 people, and at El Pueblo, we have tested about 1,000 people. With that, I would like to hand it over to Dr. Cullen. I don't know if Dr. Cullen is on.
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cullen.
Okay.
I'd like to invite Dr. Cullen to do just a small, brief presentation as to where we are. I know that there's a lot of questions in the minds of my colleagues and I on the council, but also the community. There's concerns about COVID cases going up in the state of Arizona and throughout the country. And so I'd like to make sure that we have you, Dr. Cullen, talk about where Pima County and the city of Tucson are at, and any other relevant information that you might want to share with us. Go ahead. Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for inviting me. Okay, so I will give you an update on testing, positivity, where we are, prevention, blah, what else we're working on. So as the mayor indicated, we are testing about 1,500 people a day. That's where we want to be. We want to be at 150 per 100,000. One can argue maybe we want to be a little over 1,500, but that's on average. There's some days, obviously, we drop in the low 1,000, but we are primarily above that. Our testing centers, in conjunction with what the city's doing, are seeing about 50% of those. We are running some places that are there all the time, and we're doing mobile pop-up. They're all available on the testing site for the city of Tucson and the Pima County Health Department site. We've also maximized on the internet search. So if you search for Pima County COVID-19 testing, you get ads for the people that you can get paid to go do a test. And then the first URL links to us. So that's good. In terms of positivity, which I think is a major issue, I just ran these numbers. So we do a rolling 7-day average. So our 7-day average, if we include what was reported today, is 58 cases a day. If I go back 2 weeks, so 20 days, we were at a rolling average of 70, 69. So we're continuing to see this downward trend. Now, there's many things that are contributing to that. I will say that we are seeing some of the lowest numbers per 100,000 in the state. And what makes us different? I think we do have better compliance. We did recommend that our schools delay before they went back to hybrid, and most of them are now in the process of entering. Yesterday, just so you're aware, we did have 18 cases reported from our schools. That was a high number for us. We usually had around 10 to 12. Those are cases at a school. It could be faculty or staff or an individual student, but those are still pretty low numbers compared to what we were worried we were going to get. The university continues to have very low numbers. I think their number today I saw, but I don't really remember, but I think it's around 10. So they're very low, 10, 11, 12 cases a day. So overall, we're doing really well compared to the other counties. Will we be able to sustain that? And I recently did talk to the mayor and told her I wanted to bubble wrap our county and not let anybody pop the bubble. I haven't been able to do that yet, so we're going to have to see what happens. But we just keep focusing on what we can do. The other thing we are doing, as you know, we are looking at events. If they're over 50, we've set up a process for people to submit to us. Our goal with that is to review the events that are at our facilities as well as the unincorporated facilities. However, we review anything that comes to us. The other ones don't really need our approval. So what we do is we work with the event organizer to ensure that there is layered mitigation. So for certain events, we say, hey, we got to meet with you because we're not really sure what you're doing. But that is continuing. It's a process we started about 10 days ago. We are doing it better than we were 10 days ago, and I expect we'll be able to even do it better in the next few days. And we're learning more and more about how to guide people that want to support events with the goal of getting them to yes as much as we can. In terms of treatment, the hospitals did have a blip about maybe 12 days ago. We had a blip at one of our hospitals. We weren't sure what did that. Our overall numbers weren't going up, but there was a higher number of people admitted. As you guys know, our death rate continues to be I don't think a death rate's ever acceptable, but it's doing well, and some of that is because of the treatments that are available to people. So prevention, we're all working on our 3 Ws and doing things to guide businesses and schools. Testing, we continue to do really well with that, and I actually think we're a model for the country. Our collaboration with the city and the university continues to do good. We're working closely with businesses and schools, and I think some of this is a wait and see game. And I'll stop there and I can take questions.
Dr. Coleman, I have the first question. How are the hospitals and its ICU occupancy looking like?
So it looks good. We're entering into the winter season, right? So we worry about that we're not. You guys probably have a better sense of how many winter visitors are coming this year, but the ICU beds around 70, 75%. It's right where we would like it to be. If we get close to 80, we worry more. The hospitals have capacity. When there's one hospital had this situation, like I stated about 12 days ago. They did open up more ICU beds, but they have subsequently been able to close them. We haven't had any requests for emergency staffing. And the one other thing I forgot to mention was PPE. We do have adequate PPE right now. The state, the feds have given us some antigen testing, and they also gave us a lot of masks for the schools. They have been primarily distributed.
Excellent. That's great news. It's really wonderful news. I do see Councilmember Fimbres' hand up.
Hi, Dr. Cullen. We have some events coming up. We're heading into holiday season. You know, we have Dia de los Muertos in a week or two. We also have the holiday Thanksgiving events, and then we also have Miracle on 31st Street. And what can we tell these residents who want to put these things together? And they think that we're coming out of there's a light at the end of the tunnel. But I know we're also headed into flu season. So what should we tell these residents, these constituents? May I bring some more?
So let me first talk about flu season. So we do have flu shots available throughout the county. We are doing pop-up flu clinics. Also, we've actually waived any copay that might exist for flu shots. And as an aside, we've also waived them for all the child immunizations through the end of this year. So if you know people that need kids immunized, please just go to our clinics. There'll be no cost associated with that, regardless of what your insurance is. In terms of what to tell people about the events, I've just really been asked this again about Halloween, which is my favorite holiday. I don't have a lot of greatness to say, right? Like, you need to socially distance, you need to wear a mask. We know that there are ways that you can protect yourselves more by socializing with small groups. LA County recently recommended that people pick 2 other families that are in their bubble, in their cohort, and that they socialize primarily with them. In terms of Thanksgiving, we actually did just review an event for Thanksgiving, and we're going back to that event organizer with some guidance with how we think they could make it a safer event. Many of these events we cannot mitigate to be 100% safe, but so our goal is, as Mr. Huckleberry says, is to minimize transmission as much as we can. So to give people guidance about that, I think the thing is social and family, right? Like, my Thanksgiving is usually 50 people at my house, and this year there's not going to be 50 people at my house. I wish I had greater guidance. So get a flu shot, minimize as much as you can, be outside. You know, the beauty of Tucson is we can be outside, and so we know that that decreases transmission.
I want to thank you also for putting up those updates that you put up and letting people know. Those are very helpful, and I know you also have them in Espanol, which is very helpful, and I see the Madam Mayor also does the same thing. So
thank you.
Thank you for your work, but some people say, well, if I get the flu shot, will that mean I'll get the virus too? Corona, will it stop me from getting the COVID-19 virus?
Right, and the answer is no. Let me give you a brief update on the immunizations for COVID-19, though, because I forgot to do that. It's a very brief update because it's all up in the air, just so you know. But we have identified 2 of our health systems, TMC and Banner, have volunteered to be the first 2 pods that we will use when we get the vaccine. The state has asked us to identify only 2 places, and the reason for that is the first vaccines that we think are going to be out are highly cold chain sensitive, which means we have to have freezing down to -70, perhaps -80 degrees. And we have to be able to immunize 1,000 people in a day because they're coming in, and I have not seen this, but they're called pizza boxes. So there's 1,000 vaccines in what's called literally a pizza box. You can only open that pizza box twice. So we did go to all of our health care system CEOs and ask them to self-select, and Banner and TMC are who self-selected, and everybody was fine with that. However, what's important to note is that's not for them just to immunize Banner and TMC employees. That's for them to be the 2 pods in the county where people can go get immunized. We are very aware of the rural areas and Indian cells at the Tomatham Nation, and they seem to be taken care of from a federal perspective, but we will once again pay attention to them in Pascua Yaqui and make sure that they're adequately addressed.
Hey, can you send us, my last question is, can you send us some more information on how we can get the word out about the COVID testing at El Pueblo to raise those numbers up?
Yes.
And then Wade Lane and I and all our council, we can put that word out that there's testing at El Pueblo also.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Cullen.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? I don't see any, Dr. Cullen. I think we're all appreciative of you being here and giving us an update. I personally am very appreciative of Pima County and the partnership between Pima County and the University of Arizona. In other jurisdictions around Pima County, including the cities, Sahuarita and Oro Valley, Marana, South Tucson, we have a weekly call with County Administrator Chuck Huckleberry and Chairman Ramon Valadez. That is very, very effective in communicating with each other across jurisdictions. So thank you so much for joining us today. And it is really good news. And we're going to continue helping promote the permanent testing sites, as well as your pop-up testing and your immunization. So appreciate all the hard work.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity to share information with you. Okay, bye.
For being here. Bye, have a great evening. And the next item for conversation is City Manager Ortega will be outlining a couple of things, including maybe some testing numbers internally. And then there is an agenda item, consent agenda item A, I believe it's an intergovernmental agreement with Pima County for repayment of COVID-19 testing expenses that I thought would be relevant to talk about in this item.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. So just a quick update on some numbers. So far, we've tested voluntarily employees 361, 24 have tested positive. The family members that have been tested are 207. I do also have a breakdown of the departments. I know Councilmember Fimbres, you've asked for that in the past. I have that available if you'd like to see it. Wanted to give you just a quick update on the UDOL and El Pueblo testing numbers. UDOL is over 9,300 at this point. And as you heard from Dr. Cullen, our partnership with the county is very strong there, as it is at El Pueblo, where we've seen testing of more than 1,000 people thus far. So we're continuing to partner with the county. Happy to answer questions about the testing if you'd like. Otherwise, Mayor, I can go into that agenda item, which is the IGA.
Well, Michael, I have one question. That's simply, thank you for the numbers, but how many of the employees that have gotten COVID-19 tested positive was work-related, and how many of it was with being with family and other things, vacationing? Do you have any numbers of those you could show us?
Yeah, Mayor, and I apologize. I don't have that handy, but I'll send that to you. I know it is very, very small. The vast majority, after the contact tracing is performed, are from non-work related exposures. But I'll get that for you. And by the way, just to flag it for you, our safety group puts that report out, and I forward that to you. So I'll get you the latest one, but I think it was about a week or week and a half ago was the last one I sent, but I'll try to get you an updated number or updated report on that. But it actually outlines not only the number, but also the departments that have had, we'll call them workplace exposures. Mayor, moving on to the IGA, and I do have Mike Rankin on cue here in case you have a specific question. In essence, it's on the consent agenda for this evening. This is a follow-up to direction you provided some time ago to establish a relationship with Pima County. So as usual, we'll call it the docs follow, but happy to report that a strong partnership and relationship with the county exists. This IGA that's in front of you memorializes the $2 million allocation from the City Council for testing. There is a reimbursement for some of our out-of-pocket costs, not our budgeted costs, that is included in that. I've spoken with Administrator Huckleberry, and we've come to agreement on that. But the vast majority of the $2 million will go to testing. The testing will be at Udall, El Pueblo, as well as some of the pop-up testing that has occurred and continues to occur. I will tell you that we started drafting that right after you had given us direction. So it sounds like it's to be spent. Most of that has been spent, and now we're just going to get to be reimbursing Pima County. So happy to answer any questions. I know Attorney Rankin is on as well if there is anything specific that you'd like to have addressed.
Any questions? Hearing none, I think if you don't have any questions, it was an easy presentation for you. We're waiting for the next item.
I think you're just warming up.
We're warming up. Good. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Mr. Ortega. If there's nothing in addition to report, then we could move on to the next item, Mr. Manager.
Mayor, thank you. And with that, would you like me to introduce it, Mayor, and outline some initial thoughts?
Item 8.
Yes.
Yeah, no, let me introduce it and call it, and then move on to your presentation, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Alrighty. So item 8, time has been set aside for an update and discussion on operations at the Public Safety Communications Department. Mr. Manager, I requested that Mayor and Council discuss this item after reviewing the third-party report that was issued late last week. First and most importantly, our 911 call takers and dispatchers are the first line of emergency response for our community. They are the unseen heroes who provide the support that our police officers, firefighters, and paramedics need to be successful. How these calls are handled can be the difference between life and death. The information our call takers collect and dispatchers communicate out to our first responders is absolutely essential to ensuring a timely and effective emergency response. Their role is absolutely pivotal in the emergency response services that we provide our residents. That is why I am so concerned. I was so concerned when I read this report. The contents and allegations contained within this report, if true, are simply not acceptable. Several department staff have expressed to me that many of the key findings in this report are either inaccurate or misleading. Regardless, we, the city mayor and council and the city manager, must keep our attention and focus on ensuring that our public safety communications department is operating at its highest level. This work must be a top priority for mayor and council in the city of Tucson. This report also raises serious concerns about the workplace conditions and culture at our 911 call center. All of our workers deserve to have a safe and healthy workplace. So before we get into questions, I would like to provide an opportunity for the city manager to respond to the report and outline what the plan is to take action to address the concerns and better the work environment and the culture at the 111 communications center. So with that, I would like to give the time for the city manager to talk about this item, which is the Public Safety Communications Department work assessment report. With that, Mr. Manager, it's your floor.
Sure, Mayor, and thank you, and thank you, Mayor and City Council members, for your attention to this matter. So, I wanted to preface some of these comments by suggesting a couple things. The first is I take these comments very seriously. I think you'll see from my game plan that we've got some things in place that will move quickly to address some of the issues. But first and foremost, I wanted to let you know this is a management process. this is administrative in that we, if I hear complaints, and some of you have voiced them to me as well, I hear concerns, then it's my responsibility, obligation to review those concerns or those complaints. And we've done this in other departments. I've done this in other functional areas since I've been here, some of which you know, some of which you don't know. I share this with you because I know some of you have brought these items to me, and I wanted you to know that we do have some things that we're going to be working on. So keep in mind that as we go through this, I did promise the employees that their comments would be kept confidential. So the version that you have is redacted to try to protect comments made from employees for fear of conversation down the road that would be attributed to a certain or specific employee. So, kind of keep that in mind as we go through this. So the underlying message that I got from the report has three basic areas. One is employee morale. Two is staffing levels, those kinds of things. And three is the perception of mistreatment of staff. So just keep in mind as we went through the combining of the fire and police dispatch centers into one, I brought that to you a few years ago now, but I think it was about 3 years ago. And at the time, I gave you some ideas in terms of what I saw as inefficiencies in our current system. And I thought that a combined center, and by the way, it wasn't just me by myself, we had a small team assembled from fire, from police, and from some of the administrative staff that helped with that. I can tell you that when you merge two distinct cultures, it's not necessarily an easy thing. Could we have done it differently? Maybe, probably. But I stand at this point by that decision. And I don't mind telling you, as a part of this review and this analysis and some of the things that we're going to discuss, I'm going to question that, and I'm going to question that hard to make sure that, in fact, the configuration makes sense for Tucson, Arizona. Keep in mind, again, that I requested this assessment. That was something that through the management team I had performed. It was not done in a vacuum. As a matter of fact, Director O'Leary and I talked at length. She not only agreed, but before she knew that I was already requesting it, had suggested it as well. So this is not a I got you or any of that. It's really and truly an opportunity to understand some of the challenges, some of the issues that are out there that we need to address. So in essence, going back to those three areas, employee morale. I break that down as employee morale is confidence of or from the employee. That's a key piece to that. What is their environment? Mary, you mentioned that in your opening comments. What's the environment for them to be successful? Do they have an opportunity to provide engagement, feedback? Are they engaged? What's the communication look like? Are they understanding the role that they play as a part of the bigger team, bigger mission efforts of the organization and ultimately the community? The second is the staff retention and recruitment. I see that as confidence from the mayor and council and from the community, because what that does is it builds, again, that opportunity for you to feel safe, like we are in fact providing the service that's necessary and needed within our community. But the question then becomes, what are we doing about turnover? And one of the things I read in the report is there were employees who've been there for a long time that have said this is a 3-decade-old problem, right? So the retention and recruitment has been a challenge there for many, many years. Well, clearly it's about the environment as well. How do we provide the environment to be successful and not only from a current employee, but also utilizing our staff to be those recruiters, those folks that get out there and encourage people to take on a great career here at the City of Tucson in that department. Clearly, some of the challenges that we've had is in our retention, but also in our recruitment, particularly of bilingual staff. So one of the things that you'll hear here in a bit is the efforts to really target that, make sure we're getting quality folks in the door, and that we're getting folks that are also bilingual as a part of that effort. Because it again, some of the things that we've discussed in this forum before is the fact that a bilingual first caller, if you will, first call taker is extremely important to make sure that we're able to provide the services that are necessary. But we also need to make sure that we're providing that professional development within the organization. So someone that could come in and walk in the door, if you will see that upward mobility, that opportunity to promote and that professional development, which then ultimately, translates into potential promotions and a career path, if you will. So it gives them hope for the future. The last is the perception of mistreatment of staff. And again, that really is making sure that all the employees, mayor and council, and the community have confidence in us, that the environment we provide is one that is safe, that is, again, all the things that I mentioned in terms of the productive environment for us to be able to provide that service. I can tell you that I was very concerned about some of the comments that were in the report with regard to LGBTQ community, and specifically there were comments about being marginalized, et cetera. I've dissected that. And again, very preliminarily, I have been able to identify what led to that type of a comment. And I'm comfortable that that is not the case, by and large, not only in that particular area, but across the organization. However, I think it's important that we reinforce that employees have mechanisms available to them. They have avenues available to them to voice concerns without fear of retaliation, et cetera. And so I will be employing our Office of Equal Opportunity to make sure that we are really looking hard at not only the complaints, but also the training, to make sure that people understand that there is that opportunity available to them. And those outlets are extremely important. One of the things, Mayor, and I think you'd mentioned it in your note, was the potential of establishing a task force. Thank you for the suggestion. I thought that was a good one, and I have taken that and run with it, and I've actually expanded it. So we had our first, we'll call it our strategic planning discussion last week, and the members at this point, and I use that loosely because it'll probably expand or change a little bit over time, are obviously public safety communications staff, and that's going to be both the management as well as employees. How I pick those employees, I'm not exactly sure yet, but one of the pieces will be union representation. I have reached out, and we will engage with the employee representative groups to make sure that they're engaged and they're part of that effort. Fire department, police department, our HR admin folks. Keeping it small, I don't need it, 10 or 20 people, but trying to keep it down to about that 5 to 8 member number will help us be a little more nimble. But the key piece to that as well is, how do we organize ourselves and truly look at not only the report, because the report is a snapshot. Keep in mind that when I ask you how you're doing or how you're feeling or how you see things, you're going to give me the comment, I'm going to write it down. That's how you felt that minute. But there's also the underlying morale. I mean, what does that look like? And what are the things that we can do? Because I will tell you that one of the pieces that's important is we've been doing a lot, and there are a lot of things that have already been accomplished. And unfortunately, the report was, again, a snapshot, did not really give credit to the progress that's been made and the things that have been ongoing for some time now. But I'm going to just read very quickly what the initial conversation with the task force really came up with. Obviously, number one, develop strategies for how we deal with the report, but also these other, we'll call them overarching issues. Looking at shared resources with fire and police, a stronger presence of fire and police in the facility to ensure that cooperation, that collaboration, that opportunity for open dialogue there. Targeted marketing, we already talked a little bit about that. Targeting marketing of high quality individuals, focusing again on bilingual as well. Define the roles. One of the pieces that's important is how do we define roles? How do we make sure that employees understand what's expected of them and truly give them feedback? Performance evaluations are a part of the culture, so that people understand, the employees understand that they are going to get feedback on their performance going forward. Facility remodel, we've talked a little bit about that. Reestablishing an employee council so that the employees have an opportunity to meet regularly with the director and or the management staff. The director has instituted coffee with the director, and that's great. Opportunities, again, for engagement and feedback at all levels. Training, professional development, another underlying theme in the report is training, or concern over the type of training and the availability of training. So there's an opportunity. Benchmarking performance, one of the recommendations in the report is to look at a 360 evaluation. Great idea, but it's not unique to the Public Safety Communications Department. The key, again, is making sure that it's consistent within the community or within the organization as a whole. And the other part of that is pay for performance. You've heard me talk about that for many years now, and because of the COVID and some of the other things, we've paused on that, but pause doesn't mean it's gone away. And so this is all part of how that feedback, that accountability comes back to the employee as well as the management. Reviewing of operational policies, making sure that the operational policies within the department are up to date, are current, and are trained. Where there's training to make sure that we have clarity on what's expected. I'm going to be bringing back to you, maybe not in this type of a forum, but at least giving you an update within 90 days. So the plan is to really look at short term, maybe 60, 90 days for sure. Looking again at 120 for you to have an understanding, but also for the employees. That employee engagement is extremely important. One of the things that I saw written in the report is some employees question whether there would be anything that came from this. I understand that. Well, obviously that hurts, because it's like, well, why do we waste our time? I'll use that term. And give you feedback if you're not going to incorporate that. So we clearly want to make sure that the accountability runs both ways. I will hold them accountable, but they need to hold me accountable as well. And I think that's what's important there. One of the things that came out of the task force was the development of a scorecard. So we'll actually look at specific actionable items, and we'll develop a scorecard that's very easy to read, very easy to understand, much like what the county did for the COVID item. Very similar, red, yellow, green. And that way we can see how that progress is going through that exercise. Including our partner agencies, I think will be key here, Mayor and City Council, because we're not alone. We've got a lot of partner agencies. We've got Northwest, we've got Northwest Fire, we've got Goret Fire, but we also have a relationship with PC1. We want to make sure that we're having open dialogue with them and taking advantage of those relationships in a way that will help the environment. Because at the end of the day, it's really about the environment for all of us. Those employees that are there for long periods of time, 12 hours a day is a long time. It doesn't matter what you do, 12 hours sitting in front of a machine is a long time. And we have to figure out ways to reduce that burden, if you will, so that those employees are able to take their breaks and able to do the things that are necessary for them to be successful in that. Mayor, I'm gonna just wrap up by suggesting there were a couple things that I noticed in the report that I wanted to point out. One of them is, and I think you may have even used it in your opening remarks. The report uses the term alleged quite a bit. The alleged action, the alleged, et cetera. And I think that's an important word here, because I have not confirmed one way or the other. Now, I can tell you that in those that I have looked at, I can understand the perspective on how that was given and why that was given. But I can also tell you that on an overall basis, that's not accurately reflecting the way we do business there. But I'm going to go through that, with the task force and make sure that's clear. The last thing I wanted to point out, there is some language and some discussion here about says political realities of citizen outreach to council members. And I want to just spend a little bit of time talking about that, because I think it's important. In our world as public servants, I think it's important that there's clear accountability at all levels. And I think that the key piece, Mayor, and I've talked about it, and I've talked to most all of you council members about it before, our ultimate accountability is from the taxpayer. And if the taxpayer is providing feedback to you, we need to make sure that we are responsive to it. And not only is it just for you from a policy level, but it's also for me on an administrative level to make sure that we are addressing the concerns. The concerns may be unfounded. They may be perceptions, they may not be true, they may be a variety of things. But ultimately, I think it's important that the community understand, I've got absolute confidence in our 911 center. I've got absolute confidence in the way that we administer our service there. And we will continue to be responsive as you hear thoughts and you hear complaints or you hear concerns. Regardless, we'll continue to develop responses and so forth. However, I will also tell you that I will be honest with you if I see that some of those complaints are unfounded, and I will outline for you exactly why that's the case, and I'll give you the data and the fact to support that. So, Mayor, I'm going to stop there. I've talked enough, and certainly happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. I appreciate it. I want to make it absolutely crystal clear that the responsibility of mayor and council is to establish policy. So absolutely understand, Mr. Manager, that much of this report, this workplace assessment, has to do with how that department is run and what employees feel based on a third-party interview or how they feel about their workplace. And so my responsibility as the mayor of the city of Tucson is to make sure that the services delivered to the public are 100% what people expect, what Tucsonans expect that they will receive from the services of the city of Tucson, whether that be our 911 communication center, our water department, or our parks and recreation. But there are departments in our city that are emergency services. Like I said at the beginning, that how that department works really could be the difference between life or death. And so I want to make sure that on a policy level, that mayor and council are giving you the support you need, Mr. Manager, and the direction that you need to have an immediate action plan to make sure that the culture in that department and in turn, the delivery of services to our community are top notch. And so I would want to, as you said, these are management issues. I did suggest that you put together a task force made up of our police chief, our fire chief, our human resources person. And I am very glad to hear that you are also including a labor representative from CWA, which is the labor union that represents the employees in that department in the task force, and maybe an additional employee voice in that task force. But I want to make sure that the public can rest assured that if they have to call 911 for any legitimate emergency, that their call will be taken in time and taken seriously, and there will be swift response. Based on the report that, by the way, you requested, which was a very good call on your part, based on the report and what the conversation we're having today, can you assure the community that the quality of service is not affected by these concerns?
Absolutely, Mayor. And I will tell you that there are issues with regard to the way the report was crafted in terms of some of the impressions that it leaves. But I will tell you, I would put our 911 operators and dispatchers, call takers up against any in the nation. And I feel very strong about that. And I will tell you, I probably haven't conveyed that to the employees like I probably should in terms of that confidence. But I'm very proud of them. I'm proud of what they do. And I can also tell you that we will continue to strive to improve on all levels. And that's not just at the line employee level, but also in the management as well. But I am absolutely confident, Mayor.
Can you share with us what the timeline is to put your plan of action in place to correct the management issues?
Yes, Mayor. So again, the task force, and I've asked it to be small. I want it to be nimble. I don't want it to be so big that it's hard to get schedules and so forth. I'm expecting within the next couple of weeks they'll have a framework for the approach. I do want and will expect that within 30 days we have more than a framework. We can have some meat on the bones, if you will. And within 90 days, I can give you a report that says, okay, here is the progress that's been made. But some of these are no cost issues. Some of these are simply approach to the situation. Some of them are just, okay, how do we engage folks in a meaningful way? There's a lot of cynicism in terms of people that are that have been engaged and been involved, and they don't feel like their opinions are valued. So we've got to work on that. Well, that's not overnight, but clearly within the next 30 days, we can establish the employee council and start really honing in on some of those key workplace, and I'll call them quality of life workplace issues, Mayor.
How many employees does that department have, and is there a shortage? Because according to the report, there were some dangerous levels of or shortage of employees. How many are the assigned employees to that department, and how many employees do we currently have?
Sure, Mayor. And so we have currently 165 budgeted positions. We have, and so when you ask me, is there a shortage? You can ask any department director and they'll all tell you there's a shortage. What I have challenged the task force to think about is identify for me the resources that are necessary. So if I were to come to you and say, yeah, we need another 20 dispatchers, all that means is that number from 165 is going to go to 185, but it may not be actual positions filled. So the key piece is let's fill the positions that we have available. Then we can truly assess what's necessary. So one of the things that was asked for during the budget was a psychologist, a staff psychologist, which I declined as a part of my recommendations for the budget going forward. That we may revisit that, but I will also challenge the staff to look at what does it mean when we share resources, TFD, TPD. Maybe there's an opportunity for us to do those, we call them analyses, to make sure that those resources that are necessary, we're able to move fairly quickly. And so those are the kinds of things, Mayor, that the task force will dissect for me. I really want to have an understanding of how do we get fully staffed? Well, what does fully staffed mean? That means, reducing attrition and truly moving forward with filling the positions we have.
So I get it. That, of course, all of the departments have needs, including the mayor's office and the council office in terms of in terms of staff. But the difference is that in this particular department, shortages mean risk to the community. And so I want to make sure that we are paying special attention to the call takers and dispatchers and what the shortages mean there for the benefit of the community. I do see Councilwoman Lee's hand up, and so Councilwoman Lee, it's your floor.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say to the city manager, thank you for listening to those of us who were kind of sharing some of our concerns. I really appreciate you listening and taking this action and getting this feedback. I really appreciate that. I've told you before, I always feel like I'm heard with you, so I just wanted to thank you for that. And just acknowledge that I know how difficult of a job it is. I share the mayor's sentiment with how important it is in the continuity of operations, and they have such a hard job and such long hours that I just hope that the things that we can do can be done quickly, because I've been in situations where I've worked in some pretty difficult environments, and it can get pretty hopeless pretty quickly. So I just hope that whatever those action items are, if there's anything that can be accelerated, I think that'll go a really long way given the morale. So you already know that, but I just wanted to show some love to the folks working in there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Lee. I do see Council Member Santa Cruz's hand up. Council Member?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you for, opening it up and, just kind of also understanding our place in all of this, that this is a management issue. But I think we need to take it serious too when we're getting, this kind of feedback. And I know, city manager, you just talked about the report and how it frames a lot of things as alleged. But I think whether or not we can get to I don't think that there's one specific truth. I think the truth is embedded in all the stories. And I do think it's important that we kind of reset the tone, and it's based on values, the values that we have as a city and how we want to manage and provide services to our community. This is why I think the leadership helps set the tone, that sometimes we do just try to blame the staff, but if we're not leading, one of my favorite Zapatistas saying is mandar obedeciendo, so that we also lead by obeying and we don't ask of our staff things that we wouldn't do ourselves, or ways that we wouldn't show up, I think is important. Some of the things that were of concern to me is like the racial and gender-based, discrimination that folks were experiencing, that the military style uniform standards, help kind of create an environment, around bullying and sexual harassment, but also doesn't, it also creates an environment where certain folks like women of color and LGBTQ folks can feel excluded, or like that's not a space for them if they're not allowed to wear, like their natural hair, to work. I think those are all the things that are part of the culture that we need to be critical of. These are, people in a different kind of position. They are, part of our public safety system, but they're, this is like that first connection and like humanizing our interactions, not only as like them working together, but also with the community. I'm just kind of trying to think through my notes that, I also want to think about how we work together with some of the equity assessment work, as we're looking at the strategic plan on how do we address some of the issues that have been brought forward. And then finally, you had mentioned that leadership in the communications department hadn't actually participated or shared their experiences as part of this assessment. And so wondering how we're going to get some of that feedback as well.
Sure, Mayor, Councilmember Santa Cruz, and I apologize. So the leadership was interviewed, and their notes were taken, as I understand it. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem like a lot of the comments, some of the feedback that I received from some of the leadership, their comments were not included in the report. And so that was really the concern. It was the report itself did not seem to include some of the comments that were made by some of the, and that's just not the director, by the way. Those were from some of the supervisors as well as some of the other staff that are in supervisory roles. That was really what I want to dissect as we move forward, make sure that everyone has a voice, everybody has an opportunity to really voice their concern on whatever's going on, and also to help. It's that engagement piece. It's okay to throw out, and say, I've got this concern, but when I look at you and say, okay, now I need your help, it's not okay to turn around and get back to work. I need some help in some of these areas. And it's the engagement and the accountability that's important here is, what does it look like going forward, so that everybody understands their role.
Very good. Councilmember Santa Cruz? Okay. Related to some of the comments that Councilmember Santa Cruz made, one of the issues as well in the report was there was not enough Spanish-speaking call takers. And what I noticed also as well, that this particular issue in terms of Spanish-speaking call takers is relevant to the Carlos Ingram Lopez case. The Sentinel Event Review Board committee and report call this out in terms of Spanish-speaking call takers. Can you talk about what plan in place? You mentioned it in your comments at the beginning, but what is the plan in place, and how do you plan to resolve this issue, especially in a city that, you know, has 45% Latino population?
Sure, Mayor. So a big part of that is, and I'm just looking through my notes here, is really making sure that our recruitment effort is targeted in a way where it's upfront. You know, so a lot of people don't realize that in order to apply for and go through the process in the Public Safety Communications Center, it's a background check. Just as an example. And so what I want to make sure we're doing is using all of our avenues to make sure people know what we're looking for. And I'm not sure that we've really done a very good job, maybe adequate, but not robust in reinforcing the need for bilingual or particularly Spanish-speaking individuals, because that is the key piece to this, is making sure that when we're out and about, we're letting people know this isn't just a, hey, you know, come in, and I almost slipped there and called it a call center. It's not a call center. This is a much more robust first line, again, first responder, right? And so I think it's important that the targeted effort, both in some of the recommendations of the report, are going to the K-12, going to the junior colleges, going to the tech area, the tech center, JTED, et cetera, and have conversations to recruit folks and say, look, here's something you may not think about. And we can do that in a way that also emphasizes the need for, on our end, Spanish speaking. And so a lot of it will depend on that, but it also really needs to be looked at from a pay and equity standpoint to say, look, you know, what does that mean in terms of, you know, we're paying for an additional skill. Is that the right thing to do, and how do we do it? And so those are pieces that the task force will look at going forward, is to how do we put all of that together in a package so that I can give it to all of you and say, as you're out and about, don't forget we need help in all of these areas. And oh, by the way, here's public safety communications. So that's really the effort that we're embarking on there.
So the answer is the task force is going to have a meaningful conversation about recruitment and the needs of the community in terms of bilingualism and what we need for Tucson.
It's all of the above, yes, ma'am. That and all of the things that are listed in the report in terms of partnerships, as well as those things that I mentioned a minute ago. Yes, ma'am.
Councilmember Fimbres, and then I believe Steve has his hand up as well. Councilmember Fimbres.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mike, I know that the report allotted to Fairfax, Virginia, and El Paso, Texas, and some of the models that we could look at. What are the things that you'd like to see come from those areas and implement down here to help us? The other thing, I think the report also said there were like 20 dispatchers short currently right now. And how are we going to do that? Are we going to get recruiting differently when we're looking at this, and also experienced folks? And are there lateral transfers maybe that we can look at also from other agencies, other departments? You know, like DOC that has control rooms and they also have radio uses and things that we're thinking outside the box and how we can bring more people into stuff.
Mayor, Councilmember Fimbres. So first of all, when we first talked about consolidation years ago, I sent a small team to various centers around the U.S. to look at how it was being accomplished, what the advantages were, what some of the challenges were. I will also tell you, they warned us that in those early conversations, that merging of cultures is really a challenge. They're just very different, and it's a challenge. So this has played out to some level. With regard specifically to your question on recruitment, this is really an all hands on deck, and I'll use that term. The mayor had mentioned that to me before. This is really an all hands on deck when it comes to the recruitment. You know, just looking at the numbers, our police dispatch is where we need the help right now. You know, immediately we need some help in terms of filling positions and getting that moving. But again, highly technical, takes a lot of training, a lot of investment on our part. But we are looking at having conversations with retirees, having conversations with other areas that we may be able, again, to use your term, Councilmember Fiembres, thinking out of the box. How do we get some help and some relief now for some of those folks, because they're really they're in a tough spot. They're working long hours, and it's an extremely stressful environment for them to do business.
Exactly. And I was wondering if workstations are important. Do we have any of the employees and part of your committee that will able to give you an insight into what the workstation, because some of them work 8 hours, some work 12 hours, and have to stay over for overtime because somebody called in sick, so it's 14, 16 hours. So it's a lot of stress when you're getting a call, so looking at that. And then I want to echo what the mayor said about bilingual translators to able to get, because when people call 911, they're very stressed, they're very agitated, they're very in crisis, and they need to have somebody that can communicate with them and deal with it and calm them down, and then get the information so we can get somebody out there to help them.
Mayor, Councilmember Fiembres, with regard to the workstations, really that's a part and a function of the proposed retrofit. I'll be bringing that back to you hopefully next meeting for further direction from the council, but that's a key piece to this. That's part of the environment, but that gives us an opportunity to engage the employees, again, make sure that they understand what is going on, not only in terms of information, but also in terms of feedback from them on layout and the type of facility improvements that are going forward. And I already answered the question regarding recruitment, so I'll pass on that one.
Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilmember Fiembres, and we're going with Steve, and we're going to have to close this item pretty soon. So if there are any other questions or comments by my colleagues, make sure that you jump in right after Steve. Go ahead, Steve.
I'll be really brief. I applaud the formation of this task force, Mike, and the inclusiveness of it, getting management and the employees, frontline employees in the same room at the same time around the same table is really going to be key. I know that I suspect we've all heard for quite a while that there are some of the fairly long-term legacy employees who are resistant to the consolidation. And that came out fairly clearly in some of the comments in the 41-page report that may be a crux of some of this. Also, getting people around the same table may be able to help dispel the concerns about disparate discipline. If you and I are given different discipline for what appears to be the same violation of policy, but it's my third bite at the apple and your first, that progressive discipline may account for that. So having those conversations is going to be very key to getting a common perspective. But as everyone who's commented has said, the 911 operation is our first touch, and it is a critical element, and that's why I've been really insistent that we get the remodel done correctly. But I've long felt, and I believe others on the council feel, that the 911 workers are underpaid. That's a recruiting issue. I think that the 12-hour shifts are too long, and that could be a retention issue. It's also just a stress issue. It's a tough job. But realize that, call it the 3 C's of what's been going on out there. There's the construction that's been happening. There's the consolidation, and then there's resistance to change. And now you add the 4th C, COVID, and everyone's on edge. So the report really gave one side of the story, but getting the people in the same room to be able to hash out the issue is going to be really key to really kind of resolving the lingering contentiousness that's happening over the consolidation and the resistance that some have to it out there. In the long haul, though, for the good of the community, that's going to be a really key piece. So that when someone calls out there, they don't have to wait that extra 30 or 45 seconds to have the call transferred yet again. So that was just my comments. Thanks.
Mayor, if you'd like, I can wrap it up on this, because I know that we've got to get moving. I did want to touch on one piece, and that's accountability. You hold me accountable directly, and I hold the team accountable directly. And I can tell you that unfortunately, sometimes when we talk about accountability, it's like, everybody wants everybody else to be held accountable. But then at the end, when they're held accountable. It's like they scratch your head and say, well, I didn't mean that. But I can tell you that I think we have a strong team in place. I'm supportive of the team that's there. I think Director O'Leary and some of her staff have done a great job thus far. That does not mean I'm going to stop challenging them. As a matter of fact, I'm going to challenge them even harder now. But I did want to make sure that you are clear that I understand my accountability to you, and I will move forward with this as we outlined here. I'll report back to you. We'll have regular dialogue, and I'll give you some update, and I'm looking forward to some good positive outcomes from this. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Without any additional comments, we'll move on to the next item. Thank you so much, Mr. Ortega. And moving on to item 9. Staff has an update on the fiscal year 2021 general fund, as well as the highway user revenue fund and the PSPRS funding strategies. Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to turn this over to Joyce Garland and let her go over it. Basically, we're going to do 2 things today. We'll talk about the update on the general fund and to some level HERF very briefly, and then spend a fair amount of time with a discussion about the pension obligation bonds. Again, this is an ongoing discussion. I'd mentioned to you that I'd like to be bringing this back to you until you're comfortable with it. So with that, I'll turn it over to Joyce. Joyce?
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Mayor and Council, today is our update on the unrestricted general fund and highway user revenue fund. We are doing this monthly, and then I'm going to have Jeff Yates, our Business Services Director, will lead us through the continuing discussion on pension obligation bonds and what that means for the city of Tucson. So on the next slide, as we get into the discussion on the general fund, really interesting is that I would say we are right on target. And when I say right on target, we're right on target with our revenue projections. And I think we're, dazzling you with additional math by saying, what is our expected year to date, which is an average from 3, 5, and 7 years. And then where are we actually, our budget to our actuals, and then what is the standard deviation over 5 years? So in our revenues,
I'm so sorry for interrupting, but before you can continue, can you please make the picture bigger?
Certainly.
Thank you. That's perfect.
All right. Is that better, Mayor? Okay, very good. So in our revenues, we are right on target where we thought we were going to be with our projections that we did, earlier in the fiscal year 20. So you can see by the standard deviation, because it's so close, that we are on target. What we said and what we projected is where we are. I am hoping that holds. So I'll tell you what my concerns really are is that right now the evictions are back on the table. We have the unemployment went down again. We have more people that will become unemployed. We have the second wave, if not the third wave of COVID occurring without a vaccine. We don't know what that impact is. So our revenues are holding. Our sales taxes, as we discussed last time, are within our retail and the remote seller. We still are having issues within those revenues that are related to the hospitality industry. I think we'll continue to see that as we see events changing, those that we would be having during this time frame when our weather starts to cool down and they come and we enjoy those events and festivals, and we see that changing here. So that is going to have an impact. I just don't know to what degree. Expenditures within the general fund, essentially we're spending our budget. Now, I want to be very cautious here, too, because you'll see that it looks like we have about $1 million to the good if you look at our revenues against our expenditures. But remember, we have a payment that's only done twice a year, and that's our debt service payment on our certificates of participation. So the first payment is in December, and that's $3 million. So if I were just to take that $3 million against that $1 million, we would be not meeting that with our revenues. When we get into the June payment, that's a $23 million or $21 million payment. So we just have to keep that in mind, as that large payment is still yet to come. We also know that with the transit, we did receive the $44 million from FTE to help cover those costs. We used a great portion of that last fiscal year. There was still about $14 million available for this fiscal year, but that has been used. And if those revenues don't come back, the general fund will have to provide additional support for the transit system. So we're watching that very closely. We will in November come back with our first projections, and we'll start to see what the ongoing portion of our year looks like. So I just have a couple slides on some of the major revenues, just so that you can be aware. You know, our business privileges taxes, as I said, we're right on where we thought we would be for fiscal year 21. The next is our transient occupancy tax, and this is where we're seeing the largest decrease in revenues. In fiscal year 20, we were around 13 million. We budgeted essentially the same. I don't think we'll get there this year. But again, we'll know more in November when we do our projections as we get ready for the next budget process. Now, planning and development services permits. I think this is really interesting, because as we came to the recession, what we thought with the COVID is that we would start to have a downturn in some of our permitting and developing. Well, that's not the case. We're actually doing more permitting than we did during the housing boom. So I think this is a very positive for the city of Tucson. I just think it's an indication of not only our homeowners taking advantage of the home remodeling, we are also seeing a lot of other construction going on, and that will bring us through whatever the COVID does, right? The more that we're doing building, we're expanding, it'll help us in our economy in the future. State shared revenues, I know we've sent you the reports from the state on where they are. From what we budgeted, we're right on target again. So we didn't go down a lot in the budget for state shared revenues. The state took a different tactic than we did when we were looking at those projections. So we're right in alignment for this fiscal year. Now, as we get into our salaries and benefits, again, we're not seeing a large vacancy savings here. This graph just shows when we are talking about budgeted, this includes not only salaries and wages, but all those benefits. So pension, healthcare, overtime, extra time, all of that is placed in here as personnel costs. We do have some vacancy savings, about $2 million so far. And it will be just a matter of how many positions do get filled over the course of time. The other thing I will let you know, I know Mayor and Council did vote on having the additional dollars for some hazard pay, the $500 for those employees who weren't able to work from home, and $250 for other employees. That is not included in this yet, because those payments won't be made until November. So we'll go into HERF. Again, HERF is right on target where we thought we would be. We'll keep looking at the revenues. We're not seeing much change in that right now. And again, that's just going to be a passage of time, and we'll have more information coming up in November. So I'd like to turn it over to Jeff Yates now to continue the discussion on our funding strategy for the pension obligation bonds. Jeff?
Thank you, Joyce. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. What we wanted to do is kind of come back to this discussion. As Mike mentioned, we want to continue to have it. And after our discussion at the last meeting with our financial advisor, he did a good job framing kind of the risk around the pension obligation bonds specifically. But what we wanted to do is just take a step back and talk a little bit about what exists for the city and what our risk really does look like. So with that in mind, what we're looking at is what are we paying, or what do we anticipate paying over the next 27 or so years? And I'll try to pull this down just a little bit. There we go. So the city already has a risk related or has an obligation related to pension obligations for PSPRS. And that is what these green bars represent. So this is what, based on the actuarial assumptions, and an actuary is based on mortality rates, rates of return, and compensation, what we would expect to pay over that time period. So as you can see, by 2030, that number is about $111 million a year. Right around 2039, it gets to be about 156 million. And then at its peak year right now is about 214 million. This is an annual number. To give you an idea, our total sales tax right now is right around 205 million. And of course, it'll hopefully grow between here and there, but that just gives you some reference as to the amount of funding that will be required to meet that obligation. In addition, when we talk about kind of risk and what the rate of return risk is, investment risk, the program has a certain amount built into it. We already have a significant amount of funds on deposit with PSPRS. And if the PSPRS investments drop to 6.78%, we would see an increase in our total cost by about 192 million over that lifespan. So over the next 27 years, we'd see that increase. If it drops to 4.5, we're looking at a $932 million increase. And at 3.5%, just over 1.2 billion, that's with a B. And then at 2.5%, we're looking at 1.4 billion. And to give you a reference, that is roughly double what our obligation is now. So we currently have an obligation of right around 1.4 billion. Well, this would take us up to 2.8, almost $3 billion. So I think it's important to note that there's inherent risk that already sits within our pension system. It's not necessarily tied to, none of this is tied to whether we issue pension obligation bonds or not. It's really just exists because of the nature of the system. So with that in mind, Joyce and I started a while ago talking about what are some of the options that the city has to be able to manage that cost over time. And you follow the green bars, these are the same green bars we saw earlier. And there's really three ways that we can think of to cover it. There's the way that we currently cover it, which is out of current revenues. And then there is a sales tax, and I'll kind of address each of these in just a moment. A dedicated sales tax, which would be done by referendum, or there's pension obligation bonds. And as we've been talking about, and as the council's been talking about equity, we started to look at it through that lens. And I think it's really important to note when you think about this growing cost, this is all general fund dollars, which means that every time we have to increase this bar or increase that payment, that is a reduction in money and funding that's available for other services, which a lot of our services go to those populations that are underserved already. So reducing those services really isn't the best option. And then when we started talking about a referendum sales tax, what we started discussing was the idea that those sales taxes are highly regressive in nature. So we would take that burden of that cost increase and we'd place it on those that can least afford it based on a marginal income basis. So that kind of led us then to what is the best way then to find a significant amount of cash to deposit in the system, use the power of interest to grow the cost over time, or to grow that investment over time as a funding source, and to maintain that concept of keeping the cost low so we can continue to provide those services. Well, that led us to a pension obligation bond. And when we talk about a pension obligation bond, what it is a taxable certificate of participation, which we sell in the market. Then we take that proceed, or those proceeds from the bonds, and we put those in a deposit in an account. They're invested in different securities, property, equities, different places in the market. And then that pot of money grows over time, just like your 401k would, or any investment would gain value over time. And instead of you using your current revenue to fund then your pension program, you use that interest as if it were income. So based on that idea, what we've looked at then is if we go out and issue, and right now the working analysis is based on about 500 million. That could go up or down based on market conditions and additional analysis. But if we go out for 500 million, we estimate that based on the actuarial assumptions, we could save the city about 655 million over the life, so over 27 years. And if you can see then, those are the light green bars on this graphic. And probably the thing that struck me most as we were talking about this is then that the differential between the dark and light green, those are additional city services or current city services that you're saving and that you're maintaining and keeping in play. And I think that that's a really important consideration because interest doesn't take really any effort on the city's part except to maintain its investment policy. So from that perspective, it's essentially a no impact revenue source. And I want to compare then, what is the risk of having those pension obligation bonds? Because there is a little bit of risk. If we were to deposit all of that cash, we expose ourselves in a larger level to the market and that risk. So if we were to compare what the risk is inherently in the system, which in this case is the light green bars, and what it would be with the pension obligation bonds in the dark green bars, we can see that those pension obligation bonds act as a hedge against that market loss. So at the current assumption of 7.3%, which is the actuarial valuation, we could see a savings of $655 million. We talked about that. At that 6.78% benchmark, still a savings of $209 million versus a loss of $192 million under the current PSPRS system. If we go down to 4.5%, what we see is a reduced loss. So we'd be 75, just over 100 million to the good. 3.5, we see that there's about a $5 million savings. And then finally at 2.5%, the pension bonds are going to cost us about 75 million. But I want to remind you, the loss of 75 million additional loss is in context of 1.4 billion. So it's still marginally, it's silly to say 75 million is a marginal loss. But in this case, at 1.4 billion, and you're looking at a 2.8, almost $3 billion obligation, 70 million isn't too significant from that perspective. Kind of to frame this a little differently is this graphic provides just kind of a look at, this is the comparison with pension obligation bonds and the net difference. And the interesting thing, and probably the best way to consider this in the most easy to understand fashion is that at about 3%, you start to lose money if you go below 3% with pension obligation bonds. And the key is that we expect to issue those bonds right around 3%. So really, as long as your investments stay north of your issuance rate at 3% or whatever that rate ends up being, then the city will have made money in the transaction, all else being equal. If that rate of return drops below the issuance rate, then the city loses. Typically, we wouldn't be recommending this type of debt, but because the market, and this is going to be counterintuitive, because the market is in chaos, bond rates for issuers are going down. Because when the market is in chaos, the folks that buy equities and those things are searching for safe harbor investments and secure investments. City of Tucson debt would be a secure investment. This would probably be rated AA-, maybe A+, just depends, but we believe probably AA-. So that's a fairly good rating, a fairly secure investment. So there's lots of folks out there looking for a paper that's going to keep them safe during the turmoil. And that is very important when we start talking about market timing, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So really then when we talk about rate of return, what are we looking at? So PSPRS, which we've said is our system, we have really two options. We can give all of that money to PSPRS and let them invest it. And what we can see here, this is the 20-year look at their rates of return. You can see I'll drop this down just a little so you can see the fiscal years. So you can see here, this first loss in 2001, 2002 is the dot-com crash, the market recovery, the Great Recession in 08, 09, market recovery, a little loss, recovery, little loss. And if we were over here, we're looking at the COVID loss. If we were to see this now, it would be a little higher because of the bounce back in the market. It's important to note this big red dotted line that PSPRS, after it experienced these losses, changed their investment policy and hired a new chief investment officer. And you can see the benefits of that over time. They went from having these large losses to minimizing that. So when we look at the annualized average return, over 10 years, it's about 8%. Over the 20 years, it's about 4%, and over 30, it's about 6%. But probably the most meaningful is the last 10 years, because that gives you a look at what it's been since they changed their policy and since they kind of changed the tenor of their portfolio to a more conservative approach. The other option we have is, instead of putting it all with PSPRS, we can create a special purpose entity just to contain our investments here in Tucson and create that trust, and we would control that. So what I wanted to show you was a comparison of the Tucson Supplemental Retirement System, because that's the best comparison we have, and that's the investments that we control. The light green, or the dark green bars in this case, are the PSPRS returns, and you can see them listed across the bottom. The light green are the TSRS returns. And if we were to compare these across time, what we see is that the TSRS system does a little bit better than 2% better than what PSPRS does. And what we anticipate is probably getting real close to mirroring that portfolio and mirroring that investment through an investment advisor. So we feel pretty confident that using the tools we have, we can mitigate some of that risk. And I know last time there was some discussion about what the probability looks like of having the rates of return. So this is a Monte Carlo analysis that was provided to the PSPRS board. This looks at the Bank of New York, Mellon, JP Morgan, the Horizon forecast, BlackRock, and so forth. And it says, okay, based on those forecasts, what are the likelihood of returning this investment rate of return? And so the way this is a probability, and it works, would be that the higher the number, the more likelihood, right? So at 75%, you're talking about a 3 in 4 chance. At 96%, you're talking about 96 out of 100%, or more than 9.5 out of 10. So anytime we see this over 70, 75%, that's a pretty good probability. And when you get up into even the 90s, that's fairly solid. And this graphic only goes down to 4.5%. But you can see, if you were working across these different probabilities, that there's a fairly high probability that at a minimum PSPRS system will return 4.5 or greater. Keeping in mind that TSRS has outperformed PSPRS by about 2 to 2.25% over that window. So, the way that I look at this is, well, if we are 2.5%, 2% better, so that's roughly 6% for us, 6.5%. Well, we have a pretty good chance probably of returning that. Not 100%, because there's nothing 100% in the market, but based on the information, we think that's a good likelihood. So we talked about the couple of options that we have. And this is kind of how pension obligation bonds work. The city would issue. So we sell the bonds to investors. The investors give us $500 million in this case. We have a choice. We can send the proceeds all to PSPRS. They can invest them for us. They manage the money and so forth. Or probably what we think is the best option is we can put that in a special purpose entity, a 115 trust. We then get to manage that portfolio, invest it. And it's really important to know, too, that when we control it, if the market hits turbulent times, we can sideline that money, or we can change the investment portfolio to be a little bit more conservative, because we can be nimble when we control it. When it's at PSPRS, we're kind of at the whim of that board. So we would use that special purpose entity then to make those annual payments to PSPRS. So they would continue to get payments from us, but instead of paying them right out of the general fund, we'd pay them out of the special purpose entity. And it's also important to note that PSPRS can change our requirement and what we have to pay. In this structure, the trust and the city, it'd be a budgetary item between the two, and we can control both ends of that transaction. So we can make decisions about if we need to add a little bit of funding to it, or if we can slow that funding down. There's just a lot more control under this type of model than giving it all to PSPRS. It's also important to note, too, that PSPRS is working on setting up a similar trust for smaller cities and smaller municipalities in the state to work on the same concept. They're going to try to pull them together, but we believe that we're big enough and to have the talent and the expertise, and can bring in the expertise to manage this within the city versus having to give that over to PSPRS. And we believe local control is probably the best option when it comes to that. So with that, our intent would be to come back to you at our next meeting and really kind of show you the other side of that equation, what that Section 115 trust looks like from a cash flow perspective and how it would actually work and what we could expect. And then if you give us direction to proceed, we'd start to prepare those formal documents with the intent of having them prepared for at least the November 17th meeting. And the important thing too to remember about this is that all the enabling documents give us the option that if Joyce and I get to the market on the day we're going to issue and it's not good for the city, doesn't meet with our analysis, we're going to pull the plug and not issue. And that's a critical thing because this is really time to the market. And with turmoil, and we expect some turmoil with the election, then we're still okay. But if, let's say, it's smoothed out and equities jumped back up and everybody went back to the stock market and you saw that bond price rise, then we would take the transaction off the table. And we're working with a team of advisors, actuaries. It's probably a team of 10 or 15 folks to be sure that we have the good handle on this. So with that, I'll turn that back to you, Mayor, and be happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you, Jeff and Joyce. Really appreciate your presentation. This particular presentation adds much more meat and answers some questions, and I'm feeling much more comfortable in the direction that staff is heading into. But I would recommend a couple of things. I would recommend, of course, talk to the stakeholders, right? Talk to police and fire, both chiefs and, of course, the police and fire unions, because they're stakeholders in this. And they need to hear and listen to this presentation and have the possibility of asking questions and getting their questions answered. That. And then two, since this is a huge decision, I would suggest that we have a public hearing to give community stakeholders and Tucson residents the possibility of just giving us input and feedback in terms of this huge decision that, you know, we are going to be confronted to make in the near future. So that's my input, my preliminary input. You know, I want to make sure that that there's an opportunity for all of us to be able to present. And I know that a public hearing for this pension obligation bonds or COPs are not necessary. So I would feel comfortable if we added to the November 4th regular meeting so that we give some time for the community to know that there's going to be a possibility of input on this. Saying that, I see some hands up, Steve, and I also saw City Manager Ortega's hand up as well.
I'll defer to Mike if you want to make a comment first, Mike, based on that.
Mayor, thank you, Councilmember. Mayor, I think you covered it. I was just going to ask for the public hearing. I would suggest that we do it on the 4th, if that's what you'd like, and we'll just put a you know, kind of a standard notice out there. But I would recommend we bring it back on. That was all. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, perfect. So then Steve,
Yeah.
Steve, and I also saw the Vice Mayor hand up. So after Steve, Vice Mayor, it's your turn.
Jeff, I have a question about your presentation. Can you back it up one?
Again, how far would you like to go?
Well, next one. That one. So on the 10-year melon, why is there a higher likelihood of at 5% than 4.5%? That seems counterintuitive.
Yes, sir. That's a good question. So this analysis works on probability of the slot, not necessarily cumulative. So this doesn't say, it doesn't stack the percentages per se. It says what's the likelihood of being at that percentage. So in their forecast, what they're saying is that they think it's actually at 97%, it'll be at 5% and less likely to be at 4.5 versus 5.
So they're more confident.
Right. So the higher the number up the chain, up the column, the more confident they are in the market. So if you're looking at, for instance, BlackRock, they're at 77% at 5.5%, and Horizon's at 78 in their long-term forecast. Now this is a 20-year forecast.
Yeah, I
So
get it.
higher the number,
But the
higher.
rest of them, yeah, but the rest of them decrease as you go up in the percent. That was the one I wanted. All right. As long as we can not elongate this, because there are other cities considering this, right? Am I right?
That's correct. That's correct.
So it's to our advantage to get in front of them, or we're going to be competing with them in the market, which will decrease our potential yields, right?
That could. The market could be saturated with Arizona paper, and that's what we want to avoid.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I would say, yeah, if we can do this public hearing sooner than later, because I think that this is a really important long-term play. 3% is realistic, considering that we're looking at a 20 to 25 year investment horizon. But putting it into a trust and not dumping it all into PSPRS is going to be something that is the only way I'd be comfortable with this, because that way, for the first few years while things are stabilizing, we can be more light on our feet and move from more or less conservative investments, so that we're managing it and we're just not giving the money away. But I think that the sooner that we can get into this, the better. We're not going to see the benefits of this in the next 3 or 4 years necessarily, but future mayors and council will certainly see a significant benefit over 5, 10, 15 years, and that's to the benefit of the community. So that would be my input.
Thank you.
I believe the Vice Mayor had his hand up. Vice Mayor Cunningham.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just wanted, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
I just wanted to give my input and pretty much echo everything that Steve just said. Look, this is almost at 3%. We're pretty safe. I like the risk. My comments today are actually on the PSPRS fund manager. My issue is that over the last 10 years, they gained 8%. We actually got a new fund manager that's done a pretty decent job, yet our underfunded liability has gone up. Not only that, we've actually reconstituted with the newer officers and firefighters a newer formula that is more actuarial. So I'm trying to figure out, I'm racking my brain on why our actuarial has not even leveled out a little bit. And so those are my frustrations about it. So I absolutely think we should put it in a trust, because I don't want to, I don't know if I actually trust the actuarial or the fund manager in this case. I mean, we obviously hopefully have had an improvement with PSPR and past. But the bottom line is they were going to do so much better, and they really didn't. And in the meantime, PSRS is now a stable pension fund, and I know it's got some underfunded liability, but it is paltry compared to what PSRS is.
Thank you. Comments noted, Council Vice Mayor.
With that, I'd like to say that we schedule the. I'd like to say that we schedule the public hearing. Public hearing straight some new information, but that's kind of what I
Vice Mayor, I think you're breaking up.
You're breaking up. Come in over.
Vice Mayor, you're breaking up.
Otherwise, we're going to lose our competitive advantage.
Ready, Vice Mayor?
No, I stopped talking.
Okay. Alrighty, thank you. Let's go to Councilmember Santa Cruz and then Councilmember Fimbres.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and City Manager and staff. I got to have a one-on-one discussion, with staff last week, and it was very informative. I know that this is, a large fiscal decision that's not only going to impact us, but, future mayor and council. I was wondering if we had or would want to request an update on the state legislature and how they're looking at capping, you know, the rates of return, which will have implications for our PSPRS payments. If we can, have an update on that. Wondering, are we going to continue to look for additional ways of covering the PSPRS liability, including if Prop 207 passes, and would funds from there be able to be used for this fund?
So Councilwoman Santa Cruz, Mayor and members of the council, will definitely get some information in front of Mayor and council regarding the legislature and the changes PSPRS are making. There was some formal decisions made at their board, which the information we gave you today is going to look rosier than what the changes are that they're putting into place. So saying that, I think that's definitely doable, and we can do that next time. We can add that to the presentation. Can the sales tax, if that proposition passes, it could be used for this purpose. One of the options would be either we put it into the trust itself and manage it that way. You could also use it to pay the debt service. Or I believe the way the ballot measure is written, it has to be used for public safety. And Mr. Rankin may know a little bit more than I do on the ballot measure, but that we'll bring that all back to you.
And then just finally, just to like clarify, make sure that the public is aware, and we are, will there be any upfront costs associated with going to the open market to issue debt and investing that in the city? And what are those costs?
Yes, ma'am. We'll bring them. And Mayor Romero, if I might, we've already had some discussion with TFFA. We went through the presentation with them, got their questions, and we have a meeting with TPOA next week.
Or you want to ask what happened?
Excellent. Councilmember Fimbres, I don't know, were you done, Councilmember Santa Cruz?
No. Okay, Madam Mayor. I think Joyce has answered the question about they had a meeting with TFFA and they're going to talk to TPOA this week. Yep. And what's the schedule? What are you looking at? We're going to talk about November 4th, putting this on the agenda. We're having a public hearing for it, correct? What's our time frame on this, Joyce or Jeff?
Councilmember Fimbres, that's a good question. So our intent is to come back with the documents to move forward with the debt issuance and the setup of the trust by the November 17th meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
Joyce and Jeff, I like the idea of creating our own trust. I like the local control. As I've said before, the TSRS is 74% funded versus the PSPRS, which is what, 36% funded.
Oh, yes.
I think we can be much more nimble and move faster if we create our own trust. Again, I'd like to encourage us to have a public hearing available for the community in a regular meeting on November 4th, and as planned, move forward with the November 17th meeting with the materials to issue. The one thing that I did want to ask is, will the election play a role in terms of interest rates expected because of the possibility of a big motion and the market moving around because of the election and possibly lack of results?
Well, Mayor, that's a good question. We do anticipate the election is going to have an impact on the market, but I want Mayor and Council to be confident and know that we will watch and we won't put the city in harm's way when it comes financially. I mean, we have a great team of advisors that are working with us on this. If anything, what I would think is the bonds are going to actually be something that investors are really going to want. It's possible that we go down from 3% to somewhere around 2.5% in debt, which is great. And again, as Jeff mentioned, if we put it in the trust, we can have it sit there and we can just have a very conservative investment as we watch and see what occurs within the markets in the future. And Jeff, I don't know if you want to add to that.
No, I think Joyce, you're exactly right. And there's going to be some calendaring issues. So the market shuts down for about the last 2 weeks of December and really the first week of January. So there's not a lot of activity. We'll watch it closely. Joyce and I watch the market every day. I get updates. I'm sure my email box gets filled up every day with economic analysis. So we will put the city in the best position we possibly can, or we just won't do the deal.
Excellent. Who would select the board members in our 115 trust?
Mayor, we actually are setting that up now, and we'll come back with the recommendation next meeting.
I know that for the TSRS, mayor and council have to vote, recommend, and or have to vote on the recommendations done by staff. Is that the same model that you will be using?
We were planning on using the same model as TSRS. The difference may be instead of having, of course, on the TSRS, you have a TSRS retiree on there, and you have an employee of the city who has actually voted on it. What we're thinking is an alignment of someone that's in the PSPRS on both police and fire side, what that looks like. So that's why we would like to just get those details together and bring them back to you.
Okay. Alrighty. Any other questions? I see Vice Mayor Cunningham, your hand is up.
Yes, Your Honor. Sorry, my computer froze.
No
what I wanted to say was, I don't know if is it possible, and unless the public hearing demonstrates some resistance and we can talk about it then, I don't know if it might be more prudent to get our group going right after the public hearing on the 4th. Sorry, I just picked up my son, and so he's playing dinosaurs. So what I'd say is that it may be to our advantage from a market wise to vote on giving staff to proceed with issuance by November 4th, as long as that we can schedule a study session about the structure at that time, and we have our specific board structure and everything else, so that everybody knows we're ready to go. I know it's a tight timeline, Joyce, but I'm really worried that if we delay the vote until the 17th and then we're not issuing until after the first of the year, we'll have lost our window of opportunity. I'm really concerned about that. And this 2 weeks is 2 weeks and then another 2 weeks. All of a sudden we go into Thanksgiving, and then Jeff, if we don't issue by then, the market shuts down for 2 weeks, and we have no idea what the rates are going to be like at that point. So those are kind of my concerns. I want to be transparent. I think it's important to have the public hearing. And I think it's very important to let the public know, with the presentation that Mr. Yates made today, that we should post that portion of it online so people know what we're up to. I don't want anybody to think that we're trying to take some risk or do something. But here's the deal. When the state set up PSPRS, they kind of set us up on a fool's errand. Because what happened was they created a system that ultimately was not going to be sustainable unless it was predicated by growth in every city of 4 or 5% population. It just wasn't sustainable. So they put us in this bad position. Moreover, one of the things I was talking about when I got cut off was I don't trust some of the actuarials right now. I think they're using formulas from the antiquated formula we use to pay out. We've made changes to PSPRS. PSPRS has multiple tiers, and I've never seen a report that says how unfunded each tier is. So I don't know exactly what they're trying to tell us with how unfunded they think they are. I think if we borrow the $500 million in trust, we may very well find out in 2 or 3 years that our PSPRS is over 75% funded and TSTRS is doing a lot better than we think, especially if you factor in the different tiers. So those are my thoughts on kind of how all this unfolds. Look, I know it's a high-end rush for the staff, and I know it's a lot to ask for the public to allow us to be nimble enough to have the public hearing and possibly make a vote on the item on the 4th. But I really have concerns that if we don't kind of make it work right away, and we go after Thanksgiving and something happens and we don't find the right vendor to issue, then we're going to be issuing it in the next year, and by then interest rates could be 3 or 4%. We don't know.
Vice Mayor, let me hold you for a second so that Jeff and Joyce can respond to the timeline. I tend to agree with you that the sooner we move on this, especially if council is feeling comfortable with moving forward with this conversation, with this action. But I also want to ask Joyce and Jeff if they feel comfortable having all the paperwork and everything ready for approval of mayor and council on the 4th.
Well, what I can tell you is we have been pushing the financial team that we put together since we started talking about this idea. So they're already working on the documents. I mean, what was really important for us is for mayor and council to be comfortable with the idea and to actually direct and say, yes, go forward, because we really haven't heard that yet. So we were just continuing the conversation. But we have been working behind the scenes to get it moving. The other thing I need mayor and council to understand is that these are certificates of participation. And on that, there will be assets that need to be part of the groupings of which these monies will be leaned against. We've done this before with Fire Central, with our parking garages, with our golf courses, those improvements. So that will also be part of this, and we've already been started working on those assets. So Jeff, do you want to add to that?
No, and I think we started a conversation with Mike Rankin's office last week in our bond council, because at this point it's a heavily lawyered event. So Mike, did you have any comment on that? I know that we started that conversation at the end of last week, knowing that we may be here. So go ahead.
I do, Mayor, members of the council. I've talked with bond counsel about this, and as Joyce was saying, we're trying to do as much of the work up front so that we don't miss out on an opportunity just by the timing of it, as the Vice Mayor's been talking about. But the reality in preparing the documents includes identifying the assets that Joyce was just talking about, which you also have to provide legal descriptions for all of the assets that are, I'll use the word pledged, even though it's not the right legal term, but that are used to secure the issuance. And bond counsel was skeptical that we could have all of that ready to go in time for a November 4th approval of the actual documents for the mayor and council. But we will move as quickly as we can so that we don't lose an opportunity based on time.
Okay, so then if we feel comfortable with, the plan presented, I agree with Joyce. I think we need to give a clear directive for Jeff, Mr. Ortega and Joyce to move on this and move on the paperwork. And I know that you've done some background work, but I would feel also comfortable if we all, just make our voices heard in terms of the direction. I would love to entertain a motion to give direction to our finance department to bring paperwork either on the 4th or on the 17th. I think we need to make sure that we include an opportunity for a public hearing in this. So I do see Steve's hand up, and I don't know if there's any others, but we're going to have to come to the conclusion on this conversation and then move on to the next item.
Okay, so I would make the motion that we give direction to staff to move as quickly as possible, working behind the scenes, working in front of the scenes, but get this back to us as quickly as possible so that we can get these investments in play. And we've already doing groundwork with with counsel and all lawyers and all that, identifying assets. We don't need to sign off on all of that. What you want, I think, Joyce and the Mikes and Jeff, is to hear from us is that, yeah, we agree in concept, go for it. Get out of your 3-point stance and start sprinting. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the spirit of my motion.
I'll second that.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Mr. Ortega?
Yeah, Mayor, thank you. So the key piece to this is to move it fast and get it done. And I don't mean rushing it. I just mean taking advantage of the market. And I think the key for us was making sure you were comfortable with it. Sounds like you're getting there. We would like to move the discussion, and I was going to ask you for some direction to bring this back. One thing you may want to consider, depending on the outcome of the 4th, is potentially a special meeting the following, just to address this one item. So if we can pull all of our, because there's a lot of work to do here, not just on the documents from the attorneys, which in and of itself is quite an ordeal, but as Mike mentioned, the legal descriptions and all the other logistical pieces, if you will, to establish the pledge. But that's something you may want to think about, depending on our schedule on our end internally with regard to preparation of this, Mayor.
Well, Mike, what do you need to bring back again now that we've got the direction?
Mayor, Councilmember Kozaczek, my understanding is that after, or at least next meeting, there'll be a public hearing, and we'll bring back any other documents at that time. You still have to approve the actual documents that pledge the information or pledge the assets, those kinds of things. So it's all of the documents that are necessary for the issuance.
Right. And Councilmember Kozaczek, you may recall in some prior issuances of COPs, their lease purchase agreements, there are attorney opinions on the authority to move forward. The documents are thick.
Yeah, I think that I appreciate I wanted that direction so that we could make it clear for staff that we want them to start preparing the paperwork to move fast, as fast as humanly possible, and also having the opportunity to work with the stakeholders, TPOA, police and fire chief, as well as bringing in this public hearing. So, move swiftly but carefully is always good. So there's a motion and a second, Vice Mayor, and then we could do a voice vote.
I'm assuming that the motion includes having the public hearing then on the 4th. And we're going to be ready for the public hearing on the 4th. Then I think we're ready to go. I think the staff, I think everybody understands the conversation, and let's get started. This is going to change our financial outlook forever. It may even improve our bond rating. So congratulations, staff.
Absolutely. So there's a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. You've got your marching orders.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you so much. Item 10 has been, it's a phase 2 housing market study. It has been continued at the request of staff. Item 11, time has been set aside for discussion of a construction sales tax development agreement for the 75 Broadway project. Before turning it over to the manager and Barbara Coffey, just a couple of points to highlight. This is a very exciting project, 75 East Broadway downtown on a lot owned by Pima County, and with local developers with some great ideas. This project would be the first new 19-story tower in downtown, since the 1980s. I want to thank local developers Marcel Dabdou and Ron Schraube for conducting a project update meeting and a community outreach meeting and sharing the information on the project. This meeting was not required, but the developers went above and beyond. I had requested that they do this informational meeting with neighbors. They did. Seems like the meeting went very well. With that, I'd like to give the item over to the city manager or Barbara Coffey.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll turn it over to Barb in a minute. As you mentioned, this is an exciting project. It's been a partnership now. It's been ongoing for a few years, and we're excited that this is in front of you for information and potentially just as an update. So Barb, with that, why don't you go ahead and include everybody in on what's been going on.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. Thank you, Mr. Ortega. The item before you today relates to the development agreement for 75 East Broadway. The developer is Tucson Group Holdings. They're proposing the 19-story mixed-use development at this site, which, as the mayor said, includes a county-owned parcel and a city-owned alleyway. The development agreement involves the city, the county, and Rio Nuevo. The proposed project is a total of 364,000 square feet. The 19-story tower will feature approximately 32,000 square feet of retail space with parking above and 168,000 square feet of office above that, along with 120 residential units capped off with a top floor gym, restaurant, and event space. The buildings fronting Congress will be renovated into additional bar and restaurant space as well as office space. Construction cost is estimated at about $100 million, and the project could break ground as early as April next year with occupancy in September 2024. And please note, all historic resources will be maintained, and this project will go through all the appropriate historic and design review steps. The results of the economic impact analysis in your backup materials show that the development will have a direct public benefit of more than $89 million over 25 years to all jurisdictions. The direct benefit to the city is projected at approximately $25.5 million over 25 years, or simply put, about $1 million annually to the city. Per the terms of the agreement, the city would reimburse the developer for the cost of eligible public infrastructure improvements not to exceed $1.2 million. The notice of intent to enter into the agreement is on your regular agenda tonight. We would come back to you in November then for consideration and final approval. Also, it is worth mentioning again, you did mention, Mayor, the community meeting that was hosted by the developers, so we do appreciate that the property owners and neighborhood associations in the area were able to attend. Also, Chris Layton and Phil Swaim are here today representing the development team if you have any additional questions. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions or to turn it over for any other comments.
Hi, Barbara, how did the meeting go? How are the neighbors and stakeholders surrounding the development? What was the input?
Yes, there were very supportive comments and good question and answer session. We even received some follow-up emails to clarify some of the intent of the proposed development. But all in all, I would say very favorable comments. They were excited about activating the downtown in this manner, especially with the new pedestrian throughway that would allow for more activity at the street level. So all in all, I would say favorable.
So this particular incentive is similar to the primary jobs incentive program, that whatever construction sales taxes is produced by the developers coming into the coffers of the city will be used for infrastructure surrounding the project. Am I correct?
Correct. The vehicle is the construction sales tax capped at 2% that could be reimbursed to the project. And again, we will not exceed the 1.2 million.
So if the development were not to be built, the city would not have those funds anyway, right?
That's right. The opportunity to attract this investment is long-term and sustainable for the growth and development of the city. I think that it's in line absolutely with Plan Tucson's vision for downtown and what Mayor and Council have have desired for growing and developing the center of the city. So to have this investment, I think, will be very meaningful.
I'd like to open it up for my colleagues on the council, but before then, it would be wonderful to hear from the project managers on the development side, to hear about what the funds, the construction sales tax funds will be used in terms of infrastructure, and show us a picture of what type of public infrastructure that would build. Did you say Chris Layton is available? Yes. As well as Phil Swain?
Phil, sir.
Okay.
Great. Chris, Phil, yeah, kick us off.
Hi, Phil Swain, Swain Associates Architects. I don't know if you can hear me all right. Honorable Mayor and Council, definitely pleased to have the opportunity to be here. Let me see if I can share maybe a plan of what we're looking at here. Come on. I think one of the very unique, let's see here. Doesn't seem to be accepting. Barbara, I don't know if you've got any assistance there to be able to help,
all right.
help share the site plan we have.
Sure, I'll do that. And in the meantime, you can share the vision for the public infrastructure improvements that you envision for the project.
Oh, that's great. I think one of the incredibly unique parts of this project is what we're doing at the site level, at the ground level. It truly is a 24/7 building with residential and office and retail, and combining the historic and a new tower together is pretty amazing. But I think being able to convert an alley to an urban retail corridor is something that will really enliven and connect the entire block, something unique to downtown. And your investment of this construction sales tax rebate is really what makes that possible. This is something where we're going to be investing into not just landscaping and paver systems and art, but sound systems and misting systems. So it's something that we can utilize throughout the year. There we go. And we're even able to connect through to Congress on that historic block. We're not destroying the historic building itself, but just going through the building on the ground level and maintaining the activity there. So we're looking at a stage for performances. This is really something I think the entire community is going to be able to enjoy.
Great.
Thank you, Phil. As Barbara goes through those pictures that you've shown, I do see some comments or questions from my colleagues on the council. Steve had his hand up, so let's go with Steve and then Vice Mayor Cunningham.
Yeah, actually, Barbara clarified it and Phil did too. I was just going to clarify what the public infrastructure money was going for, but I would also say during the public meeting that we had on it, people were really stoked about that cut-through area for the public open space and the making it useful and connectivity, so they don't have to walk out and around. So it's really that's really a key element of this whole thing. Out of the 19 stories and all the other uses, that might be the most exciting one for the general public. That was really my comment.
Okay. Vice Mayor Cunningham? You're on mute.
All my questions are answered. I know that this was a long time coming. We wanted to see this happen. And I think this is, again, the type of project that some of our incentives are designed for. So I'm on board.
Any others? Alrighty, Barbara, I think you can.
So that's Mayor,
that's take us out of the, if you want to stop sharing your screen, because I think we have two of us. You can only handle one, Regina, so you don't need two.
It's not my screen anymore for some reason, so I don't know.
I think that's Phil's screens. There you
There
go.
we go. All right, fantastic. There we go.
All righty, Barbara, what is it that you want from us today?
So the next action really is on your regular agenda this evening. The notice of intent for the development agreement will be there. And then it allows for a 2-week notice of intent before we come back, and then you consider the agreement for final approval.
Okay. All righty. Well, looks like a great project, a really great addition to downtown. I know it's difficult times right now in terms of, what lays ahead in terms of the economy, but I'm very happy that this particular project landed on the hands of our local developers because they really do care about how the building is going to look, how it's going to flow in the area where it's built. And the additional funds for public infrastructure, I think, are going to be really, as you said, Phil, an asset to our entire city, not just downtowners or not just the people that live nearby, but something that all of us could enjoy for years to come. So looking forward to this, and thank you for coming today. And so we'll have the item on regular session and then take it from there. Congratulations. Thank you all for your hard work.
Thank you. We appreciate your support.
Thank you. Alrighty, on to our next item. Item 12 has been continued at the request of staff. Item 13, this item has been continued as well as at the request of staff. We have state and national legislation reports. If we have Andrew Greenhill here with us to give us an update.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I provided some updates on state and national legislation to you by email yesterday. They include updates on a number of key federal issues. A few of them I'd like to highlight today at the request of Councilmember Fimbres and give you the latest information. The first has to do with the United States Census. As you know, the census or the administration decided to stop the enumeration portion of the census as of October 15th. Organizations such as cities, national municipal organizations, civil rights groups, and others continue to push for an extension of the census counting period. And there is legislation in both the House and the Senate that would require moving back those deadlines. We strongly support that legislation and continue to work with our federal delegation in order to get support for that legislation. And then the second one I really want to make sure Mayor and Council have the latest on is the federal stimulus negotiations. If you've been following this, it changes by the day, if not by the hour. I can tell you that today, Speaker Pelosi met with Secretary Mnuchin. She came out of those meetings saying that there is a pathway to a deal. And so we're hopeful that the two sides, at least the administration and the House Democratic majority, will be able to come to an agreement soon. Speaker Pelosi said that she hopes that there will be an agreement that they can actually bring to a vote by the end of this week. So we'll continue to follow that and provide any updates to Mayor and Council. We're hopeful that there will be an agreement and then the ability to bring any agreement passed by the House to the Senate next week. That would probably be the last week in which they could vote before the election for a stimulus package. Other than that, I provided information on the Postal Service, funding for military spending, and the upcoming schedule for votes on the United States Supreme Court nomination. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions from the Mayor and Council.
Thank you, Andrew. I just wanted to also inform the council that I am signing a letter with our other mayors in Arizona. I'm not sure if throughout the country, but asking for the extension of the census data be extended so that depending on the returns and of the census, the amount of people that returned the census information, that we use this data for additional representation of our city. And so just wanted to also add to that conversation on the letter that I am sending to our congressional delegation to support this. So anything else, Andrew, or any questions from my colleagues on the council? Alrighty. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. Really appreciate it. I don't see anyone else's input.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Andrew. Item 15. Does anyone have any items to remove from the consent agenda?
Your Honor, we've had a request to continue to consider item M separately. This is a resolution with the U of A regarding diagnostic testing for COVID.
Okay. And okay, thank you. Item 16, does anyone have any future agendas?
No, Your Honor. Back to the last item. Is item E still continued? I was worried about item E.
Item E has been continued.
And okay, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Any future agendas? Alrighty, hearing none. Study session is adjourned. We did very good time today. We will continue regular session. It begins at 5:30 as it advertised by our clerk office. The next meeting will be Wednesday, November 4th, 2020. And please take advantage of this time to walk around and have your dinner, and we will see you at 5:30. Thank you all.